Nigeria's real GDP growth topped most analyst expectations, expanding by 3.98% in the fourth quarter of 2021, bringing the annual growth rate to 3.4%, indicating a sustained positive growth for the fifth quarter since the recession witnessed in 2020. This impressive Q4 GDP expansion was largely due to base effects, harvesting activities, and waning of COVID-19 restrictions, as the growth was mainly buoyed by the non-oil sector due to the drop in oil prices in the period under consideration. Well, this is what the Statistician General of the Federation, Dr. Harry Simon, has to say concerning the latest economic output figures. Take a listen.
The economy has maintained this positive trajectory up to the fourth quarter of 2021, recording a GDP growth rate of 3.98%. Certainly, by the time you bring in the base effect of the preceding period, you discover that the 3.98% that is being recorded today certainly is relatively higher than the 4.03% as recorded during the quarter 3 of 2021. Oil contributed 5.19% to gross domestic product from the figure that was recorded during the fourth quarter of 2020, which was 5.87%. The non-oil accounted for 94.81%, an increase from the 94.13% recorded in the fourth quarter of 2020.
All right, they're joining me now live via Zoom to analyze this figure. Is a macroeconomic and public policy analyst. Another person, Professor Ken Ife. Prof, it's good to see you this Monday afternoon to start the week with you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yes, Prof, 3.98% in Q4 2021. Well, slightly weaker than 4.03% delivered in the previous quarter. Now, give an overview of some of the fundamentals representing this. Well, they're saying that it's still a good growth, but are we there? Are we supposed to do better than this?
I think some of those figures show that we can see light at the end of the tunnel. And but that notwithstanding the insecurity, which has not gone away, and notwithstanding the COVID-19, which is still being carried by humans, and we are seeing several mutations of it. But the fact of the matter is that our economy has demonstrated greater and increasing reliance, resilience, less reliance on oil, and more diversified than we give credit to. This economy is far more diversified than we have all been thinking. For the non-oil sector to come to the level of 94.81, almost 85%. And the lowest contribution I have seen for many years of the oil sector at 5.2%, 5.19%. That tells you just how diversified the economy is getting. And then if you look at the budget as well, government budget, where they are now looking at the possibility that the oil might well be contributing only about 35% of their revenue, right all the way down from 60, 50 for coming down. So that means all of that says that if we do have an exogenous shock that drove us into recession on the two occasions we had stagflation, then economy is far more prepared now to cope with that. And if you look at the breakdown, I saw that oil is still at minus 8%. While the growth was coming from non-oil at 4.73%. If you disaggregate the data, you see even more, although there are base effects, particularly on transportation, and which is coming in at 29% base effect, because if you look at what it was last year, this same time last year, where finance and insurance is a lot more, because we were at even having double-digit growth throughout 2020 for finance and insurance. So that's okay, and I think that there's so many things in this result that gives us a lot more confidence. Yeah, look at agriculture, for example. agriculture coming in at 3.58%. First of all, has exceeded the population growth rate at 3% and is trying to catch up with the urbanization growth rate of 4.6%. So we're pushing. And don't forget that we are feeding 300 million people. I keep saying not 200 million, because all those Francophone countries in the northern frontiers, are actually dependent on a lot of the grains coming from Nigeria. That notwithstanding the impact of insecurity in the 6 geopolitical zones, which are shrinking our agroecology and then making it more difficult for our women who do 80% of the grains and tubers to go back to farm.
Great stuff there, Prof. But sustained credit interventions to the sector by the CBN, many also say this is yielding some positive results. What's your assessment of this, and will this take us to that point of inclusive growth?
I think that this is again one of the things I kept saying. We just don't give enough credit for good things that are happening in the economy. It's so easy to criticize, but very, very difficult for people to convince people to look at the figures. Look at the. I spoke to your colleagues the other day on Friday, and then I read out the figures. 950 billion was poured into Anchor Borrowers Program Agriculture to really tackle that last mile. And you've seen the results, not just the pyramid that you saw in Abuja, but 4.5 million farmers getting access to credit without collateral, and 5.2 million hectares of land farm, and they were pushing towards self-sufficiency in rice production. And in fact, the import bill on rice is heading out to zero, although there's still some smuggling going on at the borders. So you see determination of the central bank with the bankers committee backing into the hilt to really make sure that this strategy they call them surrounding the last mile, which are the farmers that actually grow the crop, is overcome. And we are heading down to stop that hemorrhage on our economy, especially at the level of foreign exchange.
Prof, let's stay a little bit with oil. Yes, you identified minus 8.06% during the quarter, but let's look at what are the fundamentals now. What is responsible for 1.5 million barrels per day? That's our average crude production now at the moment. And even what we are supposed to do, is, according to OPEC, is more than this. What is responsible for all of this? Do we still have the issue of the vandalism and all of that across the Niger Delta region?
There are many things going on. I mean, globally, the prices are going up because of the supply situation, and then also, of course, inflation has a role to play with that. But also, notice that the demand is increasing because they're all coming out of COVID and restoring the supply chain. But the supply side has substantial constraints. Many of the economies, because they're all talking about 2030, no oil, 2030 electric cars. So the banks are not lending that much to exploration activities. And then, if you're not increasing the fields, then you're going to continue to draw crude to the last drop, and it gets progressively more expensive. So there is that shortage that is in the horizon. But that's not to say that Nigeria is not doing it. Nigeria is actually in the reverse gear, because we are investing about 30% of our hydrocarbon tax in frontier basins exploration. So we're actually getting ready to do more. But if you look at the balance between onshore and offshore activity, you notice that there's so much vandalism and so much hostages to the onshore activity that there's less of it going on. And you see many of the companies just packing their bags and leaving. So, and I can see government is also fighting the refined artisanal refineries, not just because of pollution, but because of the magnitude of the discouragement of the supply side on onshore. So all of these are adding up, and they're not making life comfortable for those who are at the front line. But that's part of the reason, anyway.
Moving on now, I also have analysts have also said that Nigeria might need to grow at an average of about 6% to achieve inclusive growth. that will be closer to our long-run GDP potentials. Do you think along that line, Prof?
Well, any growth is good for the country. I think even our medium-term development plan, it looks at 5% growth at the dollar side of things. But when you look at the Nigerian Naira side of GDP growth, you will see that it's over 10%, around 12%. Of course, the difference is that the dollar rate, exchange rate is always all over the place. But that notwithstanding, we do need growth. There's no doubt, and because growth could translate to more employment, because there's more investment activities that are going to create those economic activities that employs people, like create more disposable income, and then from there you can fight poverty, and then you can invest in education and health. So that's the cycle. So there is a prospect of more coming in, because the environment is beginning to be more ready to attract more investment. But whether that is going to get to the level that you just mentioned, I'm not very sure in the present circumstance. But every effort that you need is coming on board. If you see all the profile of what has been invested and what has been all the windows that Central Bank is opening up for like 100 for 100 DPP, that's going to be a lot more employment. That's going to be a lot more capacity utilization of the local industrial raw materials than the recent one, 300, what do you call it, the something. This 200 billion export, non-oil export program. Again, that is going to open up more. It's even going to go to value addition on existing exports like cocoa, oil, palm, and sesame seed, and all of that, to increase the value addition, to bring in more dollars into the economy. So all of that. But can you imagine that the NNPC is meant to be sending about $3 billion every month to Central Bank? And that could have helped our reserves, and that could have had more disposable forex to the Central Bank. But for the whole year, 2021, it just hasn't sent it. It hasn't sent. And then all they just did a swap, a crude swap with foreign refiners, sends the crude to them, and then bring back PMS. And upon that, you're even paying even more for subsidy, about 3 trillion now. So if this money was coming to CBN, we would have been able to do more in stabilizing forex. And then if CBN could even survive, the economy could survive without all those remittances from the oil NNPC, it still speaks volume to the resilience of our economy, But that's where we find ourselves.
The non-oil sector also performed so well, so well. Seems to be impressed by this performance. Now, how well are we taking advantage of the non-oil space? And what more can be done? We see the central bank even telling banks that very soon they will need to source forex for export promotion and all of that. Where do you see us going with regards to the non-oil space, and what impact do you think this will continue to have on Nigeria's economy?
Well, there is more on the positive side on the non-oil growth, particularly the services, than on the negative side. For example, if you take trade is growing at 5.34%. And the composition of trade, the contribution to GDP is 15.6%, 66. Compared to ICT has gone down. It used to be double digit in the whole of 2000. It's gone down to 6.5%, 5%. And then the contribution to GDP has gone up again to about 15.21%. So both of them, both trade and ICT, are just running neck to neck. But the negative thing about trade is that the trade is what is putting so much pressure on the forex, particularly from the black market side. So even though 93% of the forex is still under the IE window and all the formal windows, the 7% with the BDCs and all of that in the black market is largely responsible for the trade imbalance that we are having. If you look at the trade figures end of last year, China alone is dumping 2.44 trillion naira goods in Nigeria. It can only do that through all these import activities. People are just buying anything, and there's no price regulation. Not that I want price regulation, but whatever they buy, they carry all those high currency rates, buy them, and they dump them straight into the market. And so you have an inflation pass-through. So you've got that it makes things unmanageable. But so that's that. But there are other areas that are bringing a lot of hope, like transportation GDP that has gone up. And if you look at aviation is also doing very well. They've actually returned growth back to, they returned to 60% of the pre-COVID level, whereas globally it's about 40%. So our aviation is doing better than global average. And then if you also look at the manufacturing sector, again, they've come positive. It hasn't been for quite a while, but they are now about 2.28%. Although manufacturing is only about 8.4% of the 18%. The 18% is very disappointing, though, for industries, because if you have agriculture coming in at 26%, 26.8%, you would expect industry to be around 40-45% commensurate, so that you can have a balance in the economy. But there's so much imbalance in the economy that the way you tackle this is just what the CBN is doing. That is focus on 100 for 100, a frontal attack on value addition, and then give them the condition. Come and take 5 billion, you must employ 50%, 80% of our people minimum, and you have to use minimum of 50% of our raw materials. I hope you still remember the days when Obasanjo was president and he was trying to force the industry to use 20% of cassava in bread and use sorghum in their beer so all of those efforts, very good efforts, but over time they just relapse. And so I don't expect the central bank and the bankers to just start fighting the manufacturers that are using 80% of their raw materials coming from abroad. Let's just leave them and create new opportunities where you're saying, okay, going forward, whoever wants this money, we'll have up to 1.5 trillion every year to lend under this program. Come and take it, but this is how you're going to do it. 50% of the more material must be used, and then at least 80% of our population would have to be of the employment has to be Nigerians. So, and then in the same way, you progress to non-oil export and say, all right, let's see what we can do. Program one, whatever we're exporting, add value to it, and then get more dollars into the economy. Then those who are, so you've seen, orchestrated action, frontal attack on non-oil export to get money into the system. And obviously, when you sound the alarm to the bank to say, look, by the end of this year, if you guys don't wake up, if you sit on the fence, there's a likelihood that you might actually be on your own. So that will make them sit up and work hard. And can you imagine what this economy would turn to if we had extra 200 billion coming in dollars and 100 billion goes in to join the foreign exchange, foreign reserves, and 100 billion is there to solve the problem of importers. Then you can tell the naira to go wherever it wants to go. If it wants to go back to 100 naira to $1, no problem. So we'll be on cruise control at that stage.
Before I let you go, Prof, let's now project as we expect other quarters, of course, on the review to come up with figures. And COVID restrictions seems to be limited now at the moment because of all that we see even globally. Now, what are your projections with regards to GDP as we move on in 2022, Prof?
I think on balance, because we are starting in this, we will be starting the first quarter with a decent growth figure. I think on balance, by the time we get to the end of the year, we might be hitting 4% or a little over 4%. That's my gut feeling. One of the things that helped last year is we had a good harvest. We didn't have all these, the flood that affected output. We were very, very lucky. We had good harvest despite all the challenges. And I think we are coming to grips with some of those fundamental things. And there are going to be a lot more action on inflation this year on price stability to curtail the excess liquidity in the system. But at the same time, using the window on orthodox policy to ensure that there is supply, continuous supply to the real sector to increase output and putting the incentives out there. Can you imagine if you look at what could happen with us having new ports, new airport and seaport that are focused on non-oil export? That is going to be transformational. 80% of what comes into this country are coming by container. They are coming in through containerized shipment. And look at this, the tale of woe when you are going to move a container. The governor gave that example. Or even the export. Ghana costs about $7,000 to export 100 tons of cocoa. and they cost $35,000 in Nigeria. This is a joke. But when you have dedicated ports designed for the purpose, the customs and all that, they will still come there and work, but you will get it right. You will have the export conditioning center, you have cold chain, blast chiller, all these reefer containers. It will be prepared and designed for the purpose, so that you don't have goods going through all this tale of woes before they get the port or get in and out of the port, and have the automation infrastructure there. So we are set. And then, of course, you have the other one, the infrastructure company, PLC, coming in. Yeah. So all I'm asking is if we can just have this one whole year of consolidation of all of these measures, your GDP will fly. I'm telling you, it will fly.
All right, you've heard it there from macroeconomic and public policy analyst there, Professor Ken Ife, breaking it down, the GDP figures, what it means and what we should expect. Thank you so much, Prof, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.